Okay, so, the day I got married, I spent 45 minutes of my own reception carrying trays of shrimp, cocktail to my husband's cousins because my mother-in-law told the catering staff I worked here. I want to say that again because even now, months later, it still doesn't sound real when I say it out loud. She looked the head caterer dead in the eye, pointed at me in my wedding dress, and said, "She's with the staff. Put her on drinks and appetizers. We're short 2 people." And the woman, bless her, she had no idea, handed me an apron over my dress, and I put it on. I don't even know why I put it on. That's the part I keep coming back to. Nobody forced me. My hands just did it. Anyway, let me back up. Because if I start there, it's going to sound insane out of context. And honestly, it kind of is insane even with context, but you'll get why it happened the way it did. My name doesn't matter for this. So let's just say I'm Dana. I'm 29. I met my husband, I'll call him Marcus, at a friend's barbecue almost 4 years ago now, and it was one of those things where I genuinely didn't like him at first. He talked too much about his job. He laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. But then a week later, he texted me a picture of a dog he saw on the street that looked like it was judging him. No caption, just the picture. And I don't know. Something about that got me. We were together within 2 months. His mother, I'll call her Linda, I met her about 6 weeks in. And I want to be fair here, because I think it's easy in these stories to make the mother-in-law into a cartoon villain from the first scene. And that's not quite what happened. The first time I met Linda, she was actually fine. A little cold, maybe. She looked at my shoes for a second too long when I walked in, this quick up and down thing, and I remember thinking, okay, that was a little much. But she made coffee, she asked about my job. I work in medical billing, which is about as unglamorous as it sounds. And she said something like, "Well, that's steady work at least." At least. I didn't clock it then. I clock it now. Marcus's family has money. Not like private jet money, but comfortable in a way my family never was. His dad built up a chain of dry cleaning businesses over 30 years, sold most of them off, and they live in this house with a circular driveway and a room that's just for coats. An entire room. For coats. My mom raised my brother and me on her own working 2 jobs. One at a diner, and one doing overnight stocking at a grocery store. And I am not saying that for sympathy. I'm saying it because I think it matters for what happened later. Because Linda knew exactly where I came from. And I think some part of her decided pretty early that it disqualified me. There was this one time, maybe 4 months into me dating Marcus. We were at a family dinner, and his aunt asked what my parents did for work. And before I could even answer, Linda jumped in and said, "Dana's very independent. She's had to be." And she said it with this little smile, this closed-mouth smile she does. And okay, I have to describe this smile because it comes up a lot in this story. It's not a real smile. Her eyes don't move. It's just her mouth doing a thing. I used to think it was awkwardness. Now I think it's just, I don't know. A tell maybe. Something she does right before she says something that's going to land wrong. Marcus didn't notice it. To be fair to him, in the beginning, I didn't really point it out either, because what am I going to say? Your mom looked at my shoes weird? It sounds paranoid when you say it out loud. It sounds like nothing. And that's kind of the whole problem with this type of thing, if I'm honest. It's never one big thing you can point to. It's 40 small things that only add up if you're the one collecting them. We got engaged a 1.5 years ago. Marcus proposed on a hike, which was very him, very earnest. He'd practiced a speech and forgot half of it and just kind of laughed and said, "Okay, I'm just going to say the important part," and asked. I cried. It was, up until the wedding itself, maybe the best day of my life. Telling his parents was fine, actually. His dad hugged me, said, "Well, it's about time," which from him is basically a parade. Linda hugged me too. Her hug was quick. 2 pats on the back, like she was burping a baby. But she said congratulations, and she said it looked like a beautiful ring. And I remember feeling relieved, like, okay, maybe I've been reading into things. Then the wedding planning started, and that's really where this whole thing kicked off. So here's the thing about wedding planning with in-laws who are paying for a chunk of it. And I want to be upfront. They did pay for a good portion. My parents could not have covered a wedding of this size. And Marcus's parents offered, and we said yes. And in hindsight, I think about that a lot. Whether saying yes to that money was saying yes to something else too. Something nobody put in writing. The first real incident, and I'm calling it an incident because that's honestly what it felt like at the time, like a little diplomatic scuffle, was the guest list. We were at maybe 90% done with the list. Marcus and I had gone back and forth for weeks, trimming it down from something like 300 to 220, and Linda asked to see it. Fine, reasonable, it's partly her money. She goes through it with a red pen. An actual red pen, I saw it. She brought it in her purse like she knew she'd need it, and she crosses off my Aunt Carol and my cousin Jimmy's whole family, 4 people, and writes in the margin, in the tiniest precise handwriting, space is tight. Prioritize. Except 2 lines down she'd added 3 more names. Her hairdresser. Her hairdresser's husband. Her tennis partner. Marcus caught it before I did. Actually, and he did push back. I have to give him that. He said, "Mom, you can't cut Dana's family to add your tennis partner." And she did this sigh. This long. Put upon sigh, like we were the ones being difficult, and said, "I just think it's important the room reflects who's really going to be part of this family long term." I remember sitting there and not really knowing what to say. Because what do you say to that? Long term. Like my aunt was a temp employee up for review. We fought it. We got Aunt Carol and Jimmy's family back on. It felt like a win. Small thing? Not a big deal, right? Weddings are stressful. Families clash over guest lists all the time, I told myself that. I told Marcus that. I actually remember saying, almost verbatim, "It's fine. It's just wedding stress. Everyone's a little unhinged during this process." God, I really believed that. The second thing, and this one I didn't tell Marcus about for a while, which I regret, actually. I think that's one of the mistakes I made in all of this, not looping him in fast enough because I didn't want to be the difficult fiancé who was already fighting with his mom before the wedding even happened, was about the dress fitting. Linda came with me to my second fitting. I hadn't really wanted her there, but Marcus asked if I would invite her, said it would mean a lot to her, and I wanted to do the right thing. So I did. And at the fitting, in front of the seamstress, in front of the shop owner, Linda looked at me in the dress, which, for the record, I loved, I still love. It's a simple silhouette, ivory, nothing flashy, and she said, it's very simple for the venue we're doing." The venue was her choice. I want to be clear about that. We didn't pick the venue. She'd basically insisted on this country club with the chandeliers and the marble entryway. Told us it was where people like us get married. And I remember Marcus's dad chuckling and saying, "People like us?" Listen to her, in this fond, teasing way, like it was just Linda being Linda. And then, weeks later, standing there in that dress, she made it sound like the dress was somehow beneath the room she'd chosen, like I'd failed to rise to the occasion she'd built for me. The shop owner actually jumped in, said something like, "Oh, simple is very elegant right now," trying to smooth it over, and Linda just did the smile. The mouth smile, and said, "Of course. I just want everything to look put together, put together." I stood there for a second in that fitting mirror in my dress that I loved, and for just a second, I didn't love it anymore. I want to be honest about that, because I think it's an important detail. It's not that these comments were dramatic, screaming, obvious cruelty. It's that they were engineered somehow to get right up under something you already felt a little unsure about and press. I told Marcus about that one actually, that same night. And he was upset. He called her. I heard his half of the conversation from the other room. And afterward, he told me she said she didn't mean it like that, and that I was being sensitive. Which, okay, fine. I let it go. Again, I want to pause here and say something. Actually, because I think it's important context. My mother-in-law is not a stupid woman. She is, in fact, extremely sharp, extremely put together. The kind of woman who remembers everyone's birthday and sends a card, who organizes the neighborhood association, who people describe as so lovely at parties. And I think that's actually part of what made all of this so disorienting, because there was never a moment where I could point to something and go, look, objectively, that was cruel. Every single thing taken alone could be explained away. Sensitive bride, wedding stress, miscommunication. It was death by 1,000 very small, very deniable cuts. The third incident, and this is the one that I think, looking back, should have been the real warning, happened about 6 weeks before the wedding at the rehearsal dinner planning meeting. We were figuring out seating for the rehearsal. Nothing major, and Linda brought up casually, like it was an afterthought, that she'd hired a couple extra hands for the actual wedding day, just to keep things running smooth. You know how these things get chaotic. Fine. Totally normal. Weddings need extra staff. I didn't think twice about it. What I didn't know, what I found out the morning of the wedding, actually, is that she'd told the catering company. In an email Marcus's dad accidentally forwarded to Marcus weeks later during some unrelated thing, that there might be a young woman in a white dress helping out early in the reception. She's a family friend filling in, just direct her if she looks lost. A family friend. Filling in, I did not see that email until after the wedding. I want to be really clear about the timeline here because it matters. On the actual day, I had no idea any of this had been set up in advance. I thought what happened at the reception was Linda making a split-second insane mistake in the chaos of the day. It was not a mistake. It was planned. Weeks in advance. In writing, so the wedding day. My hair was done. My makeup was done. I remember standing in this little anteroom off the ballroom with my mom, and she started crying and I started crying. And it was genuinely one of the best mornings of my life. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I don't even remember most of my own vows. Honestly, that's how in the moment I was. Marcus cried. His dad cried. Even Linda, in the front row, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, and I remember thinking, in that moment, okay, whatever's been weird between us, today she's just happy for her son. That's all this is. We moved into the reception. Cocktail hour started. I was making my way through the room saying hi to people, hugging my aunt, laughing with my cousin Jimmy, and Marcus had gotten pulled into some conversation with his groomsmen near the bar. And that's when it happened. I was near the kitchen entrance. I'd gone to check with the coordinator about something small, timing of the toasts, I think. And Linda intercepted me. Grabbed my arm, actually, which she never does. She's not a toucher. And she said fast under her breath, "We're short-staffed. The caterer's freaking out. Can you just help pass the shrimp for a few minutes until they catch up? You're right here." And I want to explain why I said yes, because I think about this a lot. It wasn't because I thought it was reasonable. It's because it happened so fast, and she was already pulling an apron off a hook by the kitchen door and putting it in my hands, and the caterer, who genuinely thought I was staff, because Linda had told her exactly that, was already handing me a tray, saying, "Oh, perfect, thank you so much, just the appetizers on this side of the room," and I just took it, in my dress, veil pinned up out of the way with a bobby pin someone handed me. I put the apron on over $4,000 of ivory silk, and I started carrying shrimp cocktail to my husband's family. I served 9 tables before my cousin Jimmy, of all people, the one Linda tried to cut from the guest list with her red pen, looked up from his seat, did a full double take and said, loud enough that 3 tables heard him, "Dana, why are you serving food right now? In your dress?" And that's when I looked up and saw Marcus across the room. Mid-conversation, laughing at something one of his groomsmen said, completely unaware that his new wife was standing 40 feet away in an apron with a tray of shrimp cocktail. And Linda was standing near the bar watching the whole thing, sipping a glass of champagne, with that smile on her face. The mouth won. "Okay, so." Jimmy said it loud. "Dana, why are you serving food right now? In your dress?" And I remember the tray in my hands felt suddenly very heavy, like my arms hadn't registered the weight of it until someone else pointed out how wrong the whole picture was. I want to describe the next Maybe 4 seconds in slow motion because that's honestly how they played out in my head. Marcus turning. His face doing this thing where it goes from laughing to confused to something else. Something I hadn't seen on him before in under 2 seconds. The best man, I'll call him Ryan, standing up out of his chair like he'd been electrocuted. And Linda over by the bar, not moving, just watching. Champagne glass at her mouth, not drinking, just holding it there. Marcus crossed that ballroom faster than I have ever seen him move. He's not a fast walker normally. It's one of those things I used to tease him about. He ambles. But he crossed 40 feet in what felt like 2 strides, and he took the tray out of my hands. Didn't even set it down properly, just kind of shoved it at Ryan, who fumbled and caught it. And he said, "What is this? What is happening right now?" And I didn't even know how to explain it. Because in the moment I still half thought it was just, I don't know, an overreaction on my part to something that could still be spun as innocent. I said something like, "Your mom said they were short-staffed, I was just helping in your wedding dress," he said. Not even really to me, kind of to the room. You're helping serve food in your wedding dress at your own wedding. And I want to be honest, up until that exact sentence, out loud, in that voice, I hadn't fully felt how insane it was. It's like, you know how sometimes you don't know how bad something smells until someone else walks in and reacts to it? That was that. Hearing him say it made it real in a way that standing there doing it hadn't. He turned around. And this is the part that I think about constantly still, even now. He didn't yell. I actually thought he might. For a second. Because his ears were doing that thing they do when he's really angry. They go red before anything else does. But he didn't yell. He walked over to the little corner where the DJ had set up. And the DJ, I found out later his name was Alan, sweet guy, 40-something, been doing weddings for like 15 years. Marcus just held his hand out for the mic. And Alan, God bless him, just handed it over. No question asked. I think he could tell from Marcus's face that this wasn't a toast. The room got quiet in that way rooms do when something's clearly about to happen. Before anyone even fully knows what. Marcus stood there for a second. I saw him look at me first, quick, like checking I was okay. And then he looked at his mother. "So," he said. Into the mic. His voice a little shaky, actually, which surprised me, because in every other high-pressure moment I'd ever seen him in, work stuff, family stuff, he's steady. "I just want to clear something up real quick before we keep going. Because I think some of you saw something a few minutes ago, and I don't want anyone walking away from today with the wrong idea." Linda had set her champagne glass down. I remember that specifically, the little clink of it against the bar top, because it was the only sound in the room besides Marcus's voice. "My wife," he said. And his voice cracked a tiny bit on wife, which, if I'm being honest, is the part that undid me more than anything Linda ever did that whole day. Was just serving appetizers to some of you. In her dress. Because apparently my mother told the caterer she was a family friend filling in for staff. There was this sound in the crowd. Not gasps exactly. More like a ripple. Like everyone shifting in their seats at once. I saw my mom's hand go up over her mouth. I saw Jimmy mutter something to his wife. Marcus stopped. Started again. I don't fully understand what happened or why, and I'm not going to pretend I have all the details right now. But I know what I saw, and I know that's not okay. And I'm not going to stand up here and pretend everything's fine when it's not. He looked at Linda again. And I have to describe her face here because it's important. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scrambling to explain herself the way you'd expect a person to when they're caught. She had this composed, almost patient expression, like a teacher waiting for a student to finish making a scene so class could resume. "Marcus," she said, not into a mic, just loud enough to carry, "You're making a scene at your own wedding. Can we discuss this later, like adults?" And, okay, this is the part I want to slow down on, because I think it's the moment that actually mattered most in this whole story. More than the apron, more than the tray. Marcus looked at her and he said, and I remember this word for word, because I've replayed it probably 400 times since. "No, We're discussing it now. Because you didn't do this in private, Mom. You did it in front of 200 people. So we're going to finish this in front of 200 people too. Someone in the back, I never found out who, actually said, "Oh my God," out loud. Not quietly. Linda's jaw did this thing, this tightening, and she said, "I was helping the caterers, Marcus. They were understaffed." "I don't see what the—" "You emailed them 6 weeks ago," Marcus said, "and told them a woman in a white dress would be filling in as staff early in the reception." I want to pause here because I hadn't told him about the email yet. Remember, I didn't even know about it myself until after the wedding, so at this exact moment, standing in that ballroom, neither of us actually knew that email existed. Marcus was bluffing. He told me later that night, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed with his tie already off and his collar undone, that he said it because it was the only thing that made sense of how smoothly it had all gone. The apron already off the hook. The tray already ready, the caterer not even hesitating. He said, "It didn't feel improvised, Dana. It felt rehearsed." So I said it like I knew, because I was pretty sure I was right. He was right. But we didn't have proof yet. Not in that room, except, and this is where things get complicated actually, because families are messy. And nobody in this story is purely one thing. Linda's face changed when he said 6 weeks ago. Just slightly. A flicker. If I hadn't been watching her that closely, I might have missed it. But I was watching her that closely. I'd been watching her that closely for over a year. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it either. She said, "This is not the time or place," which, when you think about it, is a strange thing to say if the accusation isn't true. If it were false, wouldn't you just say that's not true, that never happened? She didn't say that. She said it wasn't the time or place, which honestly felt like an answer all on its own. Marcus's dad, I'll call him Robert, stood up at this point. He hadn't said a word the whole time, and I remember him standing there for a second just looking between his wife and his son, like he genuinely didn't know which direction to move in. He said, quietly, but the mic caught it anyway because Marcus hadn't moved far. "Linda, did you?" Just that. "Did you?" And she looked at him, her own husband, for a long beat, and then she looked out at the room, at 200 people, at the shrimp cocktail sitting half-eaten on tables, at me standing there in an apron that someone, I don't even remember who, had by that point gently taken off my shoulders, and she said, "I just wanted her to understand what it takes to run a life like this. What it takes to actually be part of this family, and not just marry into the money of it." I have to be honest, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. It was this awful involuntary sound, half laugh, half something else, because it was just so clean, so clear. Like she'd finally just said the thing she'd been circling for a year and a half, the guest list, the dress fitting, the long term, all of it. And here it finally was, spoken into a microphone in front of everyone who mattered to both of us. "Know your place," she added. Quieter this time, but the mic was close enough, and the room was silent enough that it carried anyway. That's all I was trying to teach her. Know your place. I want to tell you the room exploded into chaos, gasps, drama, but that's not quite what happened. What actually happened is that the room went very, very still. My mother, I remember, made this small sound, this sharp intake of breath, and my dad, who almost never speaks at things like this, stood up from his chair. Marcus turned to me then. Not to the crowd, to me, and he held the mic out, actually held it toward me and said, "Do you want to say anything?" And I stood there, in an apron half off my shoulders, veil pinned crooked from an hour of carrying trays, and I genuinely didn't know what to say. That's the honest answer. Every instinct in me wanted to just say something devastating and perfect, the kind of line you think of 3 hours later in the shower. But standing there in the actual moment, with everyone looking at me, all I could think to say was, "I don't need to know my place. I already know it. I'm just not sure she does." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even looking back that clever. But something about it, in that room, in that silence, landed. I heard my cousin Jimmy actually clap once before catching himself. I saw Ryan, the best man, put a hand over his own mouth. Linda didn't say anything after that. She just picked her purse up off the bar, the one with the red pen still in it probably, for all I know, and walked out through the side door of the ballroom. Not the main entrance. The side one, the one near the kitchen, the same door I'd been going in and out of all evening carrying trays. Robert didn't follow her right away. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the door she'd just gone through, and then he looked at Marcus, and then at me, and he said, "And I actually appreciated this more than I expected to. I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions these last few months. I noticed some things and I let them go because I didn't want to make waves before the wedding. That's a version of an apology, I guess. It's not nothing. But it's also, I don't know. It's the kind of thing that's easy to say once the wave's already crashed. The DJ, Alan, God bless him again, waited maybe 90 seconds, long enough to be respectful. Not so long that 200 people just sat there marinating in the awkwardness forever. And then he put on music. Something upbeat, I don't even remember what. And slowly, in that scattered, uneven way rooms come back to life after something like that, people started talking again. Not about anything else. Obviously about this, but at least they weren't just staring at us anymore. Marcus set the mic down on the DJ table and came over to me, and he didn't say anything at first. He just put both hands on either side of my face, this dress, this apron still crumpled on the floor near my feet, and he said, "I am so sorry. I should have seen this coming. I don't know. I think some part of me didn't want to see it, because it's my mom. And that's a hard thing to admit about your own mother. And I want to say, in that moment, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated or any of the things you'd expect from a story like this. I mostly just felt tired, deeply, bone-tired, the kind of tired where your face hurts from something other than smiling. I remember looking down at the apron on the floor and thinking, absurdly, that it was a really nice apron, actually. Good stitching. I don't know why that's the detail that stuck with me, but it did. We got through the rest of the reception. It was quieter than I think either of us had imagined our wedding reception being. A little subdued, but people rallied. My cousin Jimmy got up and gave this genuinely very sweet, very funny toast that got some of the air back into the room, and by the end of the night there was dancing. There was cake, there was Marcus's grandmother, who is 91 and doesn't hear well, asking loudly what all the fuss earlier had been about, and someone just telling her wedding stuff. Grandma, and her nodding and going back to her cake. Linda didn't come back that night. Robert stayed. He danced with me, actually, near the end. An obligatory father-in-law dance, and he didn't bring it up again. And I didn't either. It was 2 days later, on our honeymoon, sitting by a pool with my laptop open because I was trying to deal with some last-minute travel insurance thing, that Marcus's dad forwarded him that email. The one from 6 weeks before the wedding. The one where Linda told the catering company in writing that a young woman in a white dress might be filling in early in the reception, and to just direct her if she looks lost. Marcus read it out loud to me, twice, like he needed to hear it a second time to fully believe his mother had actually put this in writing. Weeks in advance with enough calm, deliberate planning to specify what I'd be wearing. So we're sitting by this pool, and I have to laugh a little even now thinking about the setting, because it was supposed to be this dreamy, relaxing honeymoon moment, and instead, we're both hunched over a laptop reading an email from his mother that basically confirmed she'd planned, in advance, to humiliate me at my own wedding. Marcus read it a third time. Actually out loud slower. There might be a young woman in a white dress helping out early in the reception. She's a family friend filling in. Just direct her if she looks lost. He put the laptop down on the little side table between our lounge chairs and just sat there for a second. Staring at the pool, she wrote, "If she looks lost," he said. Like she was already picturing it. Like she knew exactly what it would look like and she wrote it down anyway. I didn't say anything for a minute. Honestly, in that moment I felt less angry than I expected to. I think I'd used up most of my anger already, standing in that ballroom in an apron. What I felt on that lounge chair was something quieter and weirdly sadder. Because this wasn't a woman who snapped in the heat of the moment. This was a woman who sat down at some point, weeks before her son's wedding, and composed an email. Probably reread it. Probably hit send feeling fine about it. Marcus called his dad that night. I could only hear his half of it, but I gathered enough. Robert had found the email while going through old messages for some unrelated reason, some vendor dispute, and forwarded it to Marcus without really thinking about the timing, not realizing what it would mean once Marcus actually read it closely. When Marcus told him what it said, there was apparently a long silence on the other end. Robert said, and Marcus repeated this to me almost verbatim because it stuck with him. I think I've been making excuses for your mother for so long I stopped noticing I was doing it. That's not nothing, I think. I want to give Robert some credit here because it would have been easy for him to get defensive, to say, I'm sure it's not what it looks like, and he didn't do that. He just went quiet, and then he said he needed some time to think about how to handle it. We came back from the honeymoon 10 days later, and the family situation was, tense isn't quite the right word. Frozen, maybe. Linda hadn't reached out. Not a text, not a call, nothing. Which, honestly, surprised me a little. Because up until that point, I'd always pictured her as someone who'd want to control the narrative, smooth things over, spin it into some version where she wasn't the villain. Instead, she just went quiet. It was Marcus who reached out first, actually, about 2 weeks after we got back. He called her, and I wasn't in the room for that call. I gave him space for it on purpose, but he told me afterward what was said. He'd asked her directly. No preamble, he said. He just asked, "Did you write that email? Did you plan this?" And she didn't deny it. He said there was a long pause, and then she said, "I wanted her to understand that this family runs on effort, on earning your place. I didn't think it would go the way it went." I remember when Marcus told me that line, I actually felt something shift in me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something like clarity. Because I didn't think it would go the way it went is not the same thing as I'm sorry I did it. It's closer to being sorry she got caught, or sorry it blew up as badly as it did, than actually being sorry for the thing itself. I think that distinction matters. I think it's the difference between someone who made a genuine out-of-character mistake and someone who has a whole worldview that just happened to become visible, briefly, in a very public way. Marcus, to his credit, didn't let that line slide. He told her that he needed her to actually own what she did, not the outcome, the thing itself, before he could figure out what their relationship even looked like going forward. He said something like, "Mom, I love you, but I'm not going to pretend my wife did something wrong that day. She didn't do anything except get handed an apron by someone she trusted." There was a period of a few months. I want to be honest that this wasn't some instant fairy tale justice moment. It was messier and slower than that, where things were basically silent between Marcus and his parents. Robert reached out more than Linda did, actually. He took Marcus to lunch once, just the two of them, and apparently told him he was ashamed of how long he'd looked past things because it was easier than confronting his wife. He didn't excuse her, but he also, I think, was working through his own guilt about decades of small moments he'd let go. Linda sent one letter. An actual letter, handwritten, which Marcus showed me because he said he didn't want to have secrets about it. It wasn't a bad letter, honestly. It acknowledged that the wedding day thing was deeply wrong of her. It said she'd let some old, ugly ideas about class and marrying up get tangled up with her own insecurities about the family's money, about people thinking Robert's success had made them into people who looked down on others, when in her mind she'd been trying to prove the opposite and had gone about it in the cruelest possible way. It didn't fully explain the guest list thing or the dress-fitting comment, all those smaller cuts along the way, but it did, finally, actually say the words, "I am sorry," without a but tacked onto the end of it. I read the letter twice. I didn't respond to it myself. I told Marcus that was something between him and his mother, and he understood that, and he didn't push me to reply. Here's the thing about karma in a story like this. And I want to be honest. Because I know people want the dramatic ending where the mother-in-law gets some big public comeuppance, gets disinvited from every future holiday, loses her whole social circle over it. That's not really what happened, and I think real life rarely works that cleanly. What actually happened is smaller and, in its own way, more real. Linda wasn't invited to our place for the first several months after the wedding. Not out of some declared boycott, just there wasn't an occasion and nobody manufactured one. The first time we saw her again was at a cousin's baby shower. About 5 months later, and it was awkward, stilted. The kind of thing where you're both being extremely polite in a way that's its own kind of distance. She didn't try to hug me. I didn't offer one either. We nodded at each other across a room full of pastel balloons and left it at that. The bigger shift, honestly, was in how Marcus started handling things. That's the part of this story I actually think matters most, more than any single confrontation. Because before the wedding, there'd been this pattern. Small comment from Linda. Small hurt to me. Small explaining away from Marcus. Repeat. And after that day in the ballroom, that pattern just stopped being available to either of them. He couldn't unhear what he'd said into that microphone. He couldn't quietly go back to being the son who smoothed things over. I think, in a strange way, the humiliation of that day forced a kind of honesty into their relationship that probably should have existed years earlier and just hadn't. Because it was easier not to look. About 8 months after the wedding, Linda asked if she could take me to lunch. Just the two of us. I said yes, mostly because Marcus asked me to consider it, and because I didn't want to be the reason a family stayed permanently fractured if there was an actual, real path forward. I want to be clear, I didn't go in expecting some big transformation. I mostly went in curious and a little guarded. She apologized in person. Not eloquently. She actually seemed a little thrown by having to say it out loud rather than through a letter, stumbled over a few sentences, which, if I'm honest, made it feel more real to me than the letter had. She said something like, "I've spent a lot of time thinking about why I did that, and the honest answer is I was scared. Scared that Marcus marrying someone whose family didn't have what we have meant something about us. About what people would think of us. And instead of dealing with that fear like an adult, I took it out on you, in the worst possible way, and I don't have a good excuse for it. I didn't cry, or hug her, or tell her it was fine because it wasn't fine, and I don't think pretending it was would have done either of us any favors. I told her I appreciated her saying it, and that I needed time, real time, not a lunch's worth of time before I could actually trust that anything had changed. She said she understood that. And for what it's worth, in the time since, it's been almost a year and a half now since the wedding, she has actually held to that. No backhanded comments. No red pen moments. She asked me, unprompted, a few months ago about my job, actual real questions, not the "at least it's steady work" kind. Small thing? But I noticed it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's all healed, tied up neat with a bow. It's not. There's a version of my relationship with Linda that we probably lost permanently the day she handed me that apron, and I don't think either of us pretends otherwise. But there's something functional there now, something honest. Which honestly might be worth more than the fake pleasant version we had before, where I smiled through 100 tiny comments and told myself I was being too sensitive. Marcus and I talk about that day sometimes. Actually, not with anger anymore, more like, I don't know. Like it's the origin story of something. He said to me once, a few months after the wedding, "I think that day, weirdly, is when I actually became your husband instead of just her son who happened to get married." Which is a strange thing to say about the worst hour of your wedding day. But I understood what he meant. If there's a lesson in all this, and I've thought about this a lot, probably more than is healthy, I think it's this. The small things aren't small. The guest list cut, the comment about the dress, the "at least it's steady work." None of those things alone would make a story worth telling. But they were never really separate incidents. They were the same sentence, spread out over a year and a half, and the apron was just the period at the end of it. I think if I'd said something sooner, louder, about the smaller stuff, Maybe it never would have escalated to 200 people watching me serve shrimp cocktail in my wedding dress. I don't know. Maybe it would have happened anyway, just in some other form. I don't think you can always stop someone from showing you who they are. I think the only real choice you get is what you do once they have. Anyway, that's the story. If any of this resonated with you, if you've ever had a family member who made you feel like you had to earn your place at your own table, your own wedding, your own life, I hope you know that you don't. You never did. Some people just need you to believe you do, because it makes them feel steadier about themselves. If this story hit home for you, let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because there's more where this came from.